Hey, what's up, Unbroken Nation? Hope that you're doing well wherever you are in the world today. I am super excited to be back with you with another episode with my guest today, Collin Mitchell. Collin, my friend, what is going on in your world today?
Oh man, I love going on podcasts, and I always love going on podcasts that are maybe a little bit different or unique than we can talk about some things that'll be interesting rather than the kind of the typical things that people always want me to talk about. So I'm excited, and I think that we were chatting a little bit before here. Seems like we have some things in common, and I think it'll be a good episode.
Yeah, man. And I agree with you. And, as someone who's always doing this, what I always want to do is just create amazing context for people to understand the possibility of what they can do with their life. And it's interesting to me the parallels that you and I have. But instead of me telling your story, why don't you talk about your experience and kind of what has led you to where you are today?
Yeah, absolutely. And for a long time, I wasn't super comfortable talking about my past and stuff because I think I still had some work to do and thought that, that sort of defined me. And now I've gotten a little more comfortable with really just like owning my past and what that is, and feel that it's really shaped me and being able to give me skills and experiences and tools to be successful in areas that maybe other people have a little bit more difficulty with. So I was raised by a single mom. And so for a long time, I was the only child, for the first like 10 years of my life. And my dad was never around. My parents split up when I was fairly young. My dad preferred I don't know if he preferred, but I always say that because it sounds more interesting, but he preferred spending time in prison rather than spending time with me. And so he had his own struggles and addictions and things like that. And then, as a young kid and a boy, and still just, even though knowing that your dad, is not like other dads, you still want a relationship, at least, for a while, even after many letdowns and, not showing up and things like that. So there were still like these attempts to have a relationship with my father, whether it was like spending summers with him or, maybe him trying to show up for the 15th, 100th time. And so in those experiences, like, I was also exposed to a lot of things that, no kid should ever have to see. And then eventually, as I kind of got older, I sort of just got tired of it, and realized that I was better off with more space between me and him. And, and so, raised by a single mom, and then eventually my mom, met somebody else, and then I had, and they had kids, and so then I had three brothers, um, and that created, a lot of work for me as well, because I was like a lot older, so I had to help and do things, that uh, I didn't, want to do necessarily, um, but that's kind of where my life was. And when I, was in high school and stuff like that, I started to have sort of my own struggles, and really was not that interested in school. I didn't really, my mom was a waitress, so she worked nights, and I was kind of left to my own uh, a lot, and had to learn a lot of things and figure things out. And so, basically, as soon as I turned 18, I was like out of the house and ready to kind of go, do something else. And nobody was really telling me college was important. I barely made it through high school, by the skin of my teeth with my credits, and didn't really know what I was going to do with my life. The only thing I knew was like I didn't want to live the way that I did as a kid, like going into the grocery store, hoping my friends weren't going to be there, seeing that we were paying for our food with food stamps.
Yeah, man. I resonate with that in a lot of different ways. And there's there's always these interesting moments in life where we that experience I had to a T. I'll never forget. I don't know if I grew up in the Midwest, and there used to be this place called Cubs Foods, and you would go to this place, and I remember the first time ever that our food stamps couldn't cover the bill, and my mom had me go and take the food back and put it back on the shelf. And there were
Mm.
always these series of experiences that I had where I was like, you know what? When I'm a grown up, this is not going to be my fucking life. I don't know what that means, but I will figure it out.
Yeah.
And I think, unfortunately, for so many of us, and I'm curious if this was your experience as well, even though we have that thought process, there's still this space in which we have to navigate getting out of our own damn way. What was that your experience as you started to grow and now become an entrepreneur and family man and things of that nature?
Mm, yeah, I'm going to touch on that in a second. So I totally identify with your experience, man. I hadn't thought about that part of it for so long, but as you were saying, I was like, I vividly remember like putting the groceries on there and then like it just, you know, not being sure if it was going to cover it and having to put things back. Or, you know, we got coupons for like government cheese and it was like we couldn't get the other cheese, we had to get that cheese, so we had to get this milk because that's, you know. And so anyway, yeah, I mean, it's tough to get out of your own way when you're not taught a lot of skills, you know, or you don't have a lot of, you know, experience like dealing with those things. You know, my mom, I love her to death, and like she did the best she could with the tools that she had. And, you know, I got passed down the tools that she had. And then with my dad not being around, there was a lot that, you know, I didn't learn, you know, as a kid. And so a lot of things I had to figure out on my own. And as a young kid, that sucks, you know, but like fast forward, that's actually a superpower of mine, you know? And so you kind of have a choice. Like everybody has a story. Many, many, many people have it way worse off than me as growing up as a kid. Some people have it not as bad. Some people, you know, maybe similar. But you have a choice. Like you're going to let that define you and hold you back and be your excuse. And, you know, it's a little harsh, but like, are you going to be the victim, or are you like going to use that to propel you forward as motivation, as fuel, you know? And I had a very similar thought as yourself. Like, I don't know what I want to do, but I don't want to live like this, you know? And when I got my first sales job ever, you know, I have a sales podcast and I talk to tons of salespeople. And your typical story is like, hey, I went to school for this thing and I didn't work out, and sales was my plan B. Or I thought I was going to do this and didn't enjoy it. And, or, you know, it was a bad time in economic time, and like sales was the only job I can get, and, you know, kind of fell into sales by accident. For me, it was like I had no other opportunities. There was nothing else for me. And so I saw that as a way out. And, you know, I took that opportunity. And, you know, now today, fast forward, and we can unpack things, but I have a life that I could never dream of having.
Yeah. Yeah, I resonate that vehemently, man. And you know, my first it's so funny as we're having this conversation. I don't think I've ever said this on this podcast before. My first legal job, let me be very clear about that. My first legal job in sales was for Cutco. And I didn't know, dude, I literally remember I did not know what else to do. I was looking through the back of the newspaper and the classifieds, and everything always said like 3 years experience, 5 years experience, 10 years experience, college diploma. I'm like, I didn't graduate high school. Like, how am I gonna go? I don't have a college diploma. And I go and I'm in this group interview, and I'm just like, what the fuck have I gotten myself into? But to your point, something really fascinating happened in the course of just the short period of time I worked there, because I was like, this ain't for me. But in that, I started to think about the skills that I needed to create change in my life. When you were in it, and I think what happens is often we're in this place where we're measuring the possibility of what it is that we can do with our life, but still somehow being trapped in that narrative. What is it that you did as you were starting to acquire these skills that you use to project yourself forward into where you are now? Because, you know, to say that you never dreamt of this life, I want to push back on you, and I want to go, are you sure about that? Because it sounded to me like you started putting effort in a long time ago.
Mm. Yeah, it's an interesting perspective. Yeah, I don't think that in the moment, I don't think I realized it. This is like, you know, I didn't have like, oh, I dreamed of not doing these things, but like not no, I think what it really came down to is I didn't really know what I wanted, but I was really clear on what I didn't want. And that was enough to give me the motivation and the drive to pour all of myself into something. And that something was that first sales job. And I remember, the first time probably getting a commission check that was worth probably more than my mom typically got in a whole year. And it was like, this is how I'm not going to live like that. This is how, and also too, and this isn't the healthiest of things. But just the sincere desire to not be like my dad was enough to motivate me to do better and be different.
Yeah, that's interesting to me because I have that same experience. I was recently at Funnel Hacking Live, Russell Brunson event. I'm sure you know who he is if you're in this arena. Um, and he had on this guy Jarrett White. I don't know if you are familiar with
Yeah.
Garrett White or not. Um, I have my own thoughts on him. He's a homie, but he's a wild dude. But he said something really fascinating that has sat with me, and it has just been like drilled in my head. He goes, if you want to be successful in life, you have to leave your father's house. And I have been thinking about that like ad nauseum and what that means in the context of like having the life that you want to have. And I've never met my father, never met him one time, but I remember being like, if I ever have kids, I'll never be like him, right? I'll never be like them. I do think there is something powerful about this idea that you can use, for lack of a better term, negative reinforcement in a positive way to create change in your life. When you're thinking about like what's next for you, is that something you still leverage? Is that still like a tool in your toolbox? Like, how do you start to, now that you've kind of stepped into, dare I say, a new plateau, like how do you go forward at this point?
Yeah. So that was enough to get me so far. Like, not wanting to be like him, not wanting to live that way. But that only really will take you so far. And at some point, you really got to let that shit go. You know, you got to work through it. You got to get to the other side and get to a place where you can really level up, and even just get to the other side of doing the work, on that stuff. Right. And so that is not enough it's not sustainable. Right. Like, and for a long time, like, I'll just say it, man, I hated him. I literally hated him. And even till like, even, now I have kids. I have 3 kids and number 4 on the way, you know, and there's been attempts occasionally for him to try to communicate and be in my life or whatever. And I pretty much shut him out for the most part. Cause I was like, look, you're not going to let them down how you constantly let me down my whole life. I'm not even going to allow them to be vulnerable, to experience that, because I know what it feels like. And, recently for the first time, I let him see my kids, you know, and, I'm at a place now where I don't hate him. And actually those experiences, I dealt with a lot of tough things as a kid that most people, don't. I've seen my mom get shot right in front of my eyes and bleeding in front of me. My dad was, very heavy into drugs and all of these other things that I was exposed to. And, I've been able to be, somewhat successful in business. And I think a lot of my experiences as a kid of dealing with those things that are extremely difficult, like things in business, like I love challenge. I thrive on a challenge. And, I love starting a business from scratch where it's hard and it's tough and nobody knows who you are and they don't care and you get lots of rejection. Like I can thrive in that environment. And there's a lot of things that have come up in business and scaling businesses that would stress a lot of people out. And I'm just like, that's nothing. And I can just keep going forward. That grit, that resilience, those are things that only you can really foster through experience. Now, it's unfortunate that that had to come from the experiences that I had, but I got the cards that I was dealt, and I was able to make the best out of it.
Yeah, and we don't have any control over the cards we're dealt with. It's Tony Robbins always calls it, some people are part of the lucky sperm club. Like sometimes you're just lucky. Sometimes you land in the silver spoon, but like for us, for the people listening to the show, that was not them, that was not us. And so in that, it very much is a part of the hero's journey. You can play the victim all day long and you're going to have a certain kind of life. And then you recognize that you can push through it, you can overcome it, you can heal it, you can own the story instead of it owning you, and you are setting yourself up for such a different experience. And I say this all the time on this show. As an entrepreneur, I think being an entrepreneur is the most freeing thing for people who have experienced traumatic experiences, because it's the closest I think that you get to being you. And in that, I think about it all the time in my own experiences of scaling businesses and leading teams and building structure. The worst case scenario is never anything remotely close to what I've already survived. I mean,
Oh,
the worst fucking thing that's ever going to happen to me in business is I'm going to close it and I'm going to go bankrupt. That doesn't hold a candle to like stealing food for survival and being homeless as a kid and stealing cars and getting shot at by the cops and all of the craziness that my teenage years were. And I think that resiliency is such an under or misrepresented asset to what it means to like be a human being. And I think that the more that people are willing to tap into their resilience and go, you know what, I'm going to go for it. And maybe even it's this, and I'm curious about your thoughts on it. When I think about success that I've had in my life, and I'll tell you this, Colin, in all transparency, I am nowhere remotely close to the life that I'm trying to create. I'm still years and years away from it, but I move towards it every single day because I know on a long enough timeline, because I've done it before, I can build and scale my life to what I want it to be. But in that, I've recognized and understood and even reconciled to a very interesting extent that I have to face my fear. I have to be willing to look down and go, all right, fuck it. What is your experience like? Like, do you resonate with that? Is there something in the way that you operate where you're like, I'm willing to face this fear because I know the other side isn't as bad? Like, what's that like for you?
Yeah, I mean, it ties back to what you said, and your experiences. I mean, I've never been shot at by the police, but I've had some stories and some shit that I've survived, and it really in business, like there's nothing that freaks me out. It's exactly what you said. What's the worst that happens? I fucking lose it all. I'll build it back. I don't care. So it's really hard to get freaked out or let fear hold you back in business. I mean, that's a superpower. People that have been through shit like me and you have a superpower that they're not tapping into. And I love what you said is like people that have dealt with this type of stuff make great entrepreneurs because they have that grit. They have that resiliency. They've survived things that are way more difficult than entrepreneurship. And they can use that as fuel to just push through walls that other people don't have the grit or tenacity to do so. And so, yeah, I mean, fear, I mean, like when I deal with fear, like fear is a real thing. It can be crippling for some people, especially if they haven't dealt with their past, if they haven't done some work to get to the other side of that, if they haven't, if they haven't done that work, it's hard, right? But if they have, then, when things creep up on me, that fear, whatever you want to call it, my first thought is always, what's the worst that could happen? And I let that sink in for a second. And it's like, okay, if worst case scenario were to happen, would me and my family be okay? And 99.999% of the time, the answer is yes. And so it's like, fuck it. What's the worst can happen? Let's go. Let's try it. Let's do it. I love experimenting, trying new things. I've started 4 different businesses. 3 have been successful. There's been tough times in all of those. And even when I fail, or even when things don't work out the way that I was hoping, there's usually at least a good learning lesson or some experience in there that can take me to the next thing.
Do you think do you think having that mindset and that willingness in the way that you just laid it out is the key perhaps to what we would call tapping into that superpower that you may already have? Or do you think that there's another way to tap into it?
I don't know. I honestly don't know. I know that in my experience, yes. I don't know. What's your experience been? Is it different for you, or is your experience similar to mine?
You know what I think it is, man, is I've always kind of just laid out this North Star. Like, what do I want to build in my life? How do I want to be remembered? What is it that I want to leave the impact on? Because to go from this homeless kid who was stealing food to survive to being a number one best-selling author, award-winning speaker, podcast host, the whole nine, everything I've built, um, it's literally tied into me being so incredibly fucking stubborn that I don't care. Like I literally don't like I write something down and I ask myself, what does it take to get there? What does it take to get there? And then I just simply reverse engineer it all the way back to step one. And in that, I just start going forward, knowing that on this path, like I'm going to mess up every day. I'm going to fail every day. I'm going to be in this position where every single day, more than likely, I'm going to have to take like a hit. But you know this as well as I do. Like you are going to fall down more than you succeed in anything that you try to accomplish. But on a long enough timeline, you can accomplish anything if you're willing to fall down. And
Yeah.
so I just go, man, fuck it. I'm stubborn. Like I get it. It's my greatest attribute and my greatest character flaw. But since I have this presence, this self-awareness within me, I know that going into it, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes, and I don't know if you relate to this, I got people in my life that will check me. They'll be like, yo, dude, you're being a psycho right now. Why don't you bring it down back to a human level? Because man, I get so fired up. Dude, I write down goals and they take me 5 years to accomplish, 7 years to accomplish. Not, but they happen. Just last week, I accomplished something that I'd written down 7 years ago. Think about that, right? And that's kind of my driver for me. I go, I believe it's in us. I believe we all have the ability, but maybe it's maybe it's you have to be willing to ask for help. Maybe you have to be vulnerable. Maybe you have to recognize that it's okay if you're not perfect. I don't know because I mean, and you're right. We all are very different. Do you think that there's some type of commonality, that you've seen in the people around you that are successful or that you use as a marker? Is there something that you notice that you're like, maybe that's tangible and I can pick that and bring that into my life?
I'm going to answer your question in 1 second, but I just want to touch on a couple of things that you said. Is that stubbornness that you mentioned, as a character flaw slash superpower is key because people look, and it also has to do with that self-awareness or your perspective on like what is failure, right? Making mistakes along the way, that's not failure. That's just part of the journey. That's part of the path. Failure is when you quit or you give up or you throw your hands up. Now, the stubbornness could not serve you in a positive way if the thing that you're trying to do isn't the best thing or isn't something that's gonna work. But even if you see it through and it takes you to the next best idea that gets you to the bigger 7-year goal, then it was still worth it.
Yeah, I agree. It is still worth it. And in that, let me ask you this because maybe this will be something practical. And I want people to hear this in a way that can be a tool. And it may not actually be practical, but I believe there is practicality in the systems of creating change in your life. If you were to kind of lay out, and I don't necessarily mean step by step, but if you were just kind of lay out, this is the things I've done, tried, experienced to get to where I am, what does that framework look like?
Yeah, and this is something that I had to learn through experience. And whether you're in like a job or entrepreneurship or you have a side hustle or wherever you're at, right? a lot of people think they need to get better at that thing, their job, their role, sales, marketing, design, developing, building, whatever. They think they need to get better at those things to hit that goal, that 5-year goal, that 10-year goal, whatever their North Star is. And that is the quickest way to burn out and give up on your idea or your goal. And what I actually realized is the more that I invested in myself personally, the much easier the professional stuff goes. Like, so whatever, the more I took care of myself personally, spiritually, mentally, physically, spent more time and attention to that, then the more success I had professionally. And so what does that look like? Well, for me, it's meditating. For me, it's exercising consistently every morning, trying, to have a journal practice, spending quality time with my family, eating healthy, standing all day, drinking a gallon of water, like all of these things that have become part of like taking care of me so that I can show up as the best version of myself with whatever I'm trying to accomplish today.
How long I'm really curious about this. I understand what it takes to get to the place where you can say that, but how long did it take you to be able to get to the place where you can say that?
Probably, I would say, for the first, once I got that first sales job, from there, probably for the first 4 or 5 years, it was just work crazy hours, burnout, like not get proper sleep all the time, not taking good care of myself. And then realizing that I was only going to get so far with that. And then really starting to take better care of myself. And it's, it's not perfect every day. Do I miss, some days and not do things that I should? And do I fall off track? Absolutely. But if you can start to develop that self-awareness where you're a little bit off and you need to get back on track. Like the hardest part for me was I tend to be like a very black and white person. Like I'm all in on something or I'm all out. And if I'm all in on something that's good for me and then somehow I fall off of doing it, I used to be very hard on myself about it, right? So then you get that negative self-talk and judging and all of this, which just can spin you out. And so finding a way where you can be more empathetic to yourself of like trying things, doing different things, implementing and finding what works best for you. What works best for me might not work best for you, but finding out what you need to do to take care of yourself so that you can show up as the best version of yourself in your professional role or trying to accomplish whatever goals you've set out.
Let me ask you. So when I was growing up, my identity was very much tied to this concept of like, don't die. And I mean that in a real way. And I'm sure you'll understand this. And so when I graduated high school, finally, they literally just handed me the diploma. They're like, get the hell out of here. And I was like, oh shit, what do I do now? I became entirely lost in the world in a way that I can't even really convey. And so when you're thinking about where you're at in your life now, and this is why I'm asking if this hits home for you or not, is have you had to define the person that you are today? Was there a practice? Did you write something? Did you create something? Like how did you become the Collin you are today?
Yeah, a lot of it had to do with not necessarily like writing out or mapping out or defining like who I am, but realizing what things don't define me. And I think that's where things really changed, so early in my career and even early in entrepreneurship, like I let my successes and my mistakes or failures or whatever you want to call them, challenges, I let those sort of define me. And that can really take you to a dark place, so if it was a great month, then I felt great. If it was a bad month, I felt horrible, and so, you got to learn that those things don't define you, right? So your successes and your failures don't define you. And that can be a hard thing to actually conceptualize, like, because we're so accustomed in society, like to be defined by what we have or how much is in the bank, or how great we look on social media, or how many likes and comments and engagements we got, or how many downloads and listens we have on our podcast. Like, we let a lot of those things define us, positive things and negative. But, you know, those are all just like a lot of vanity metrics. And like, yes, we all need money, and we all want to be successful, and we all have these big goals that we're trying to accomplish, and we need fuel to move forward towards them. But it's an emotional roller coaster if you let those things define who you are and how you actually feel about yourself.
So if it's not success or failure, how do you define yourself? Like, what are the
Yeah.
cornerstones?
I mean, what's most important to you, you know? And so, do I have ambitions and goals, you know, and targets and things that I want to? Absolutely. And this was a hard concept for me that I really wrestled with, because it was like, I was defined by like those goals and hitting them and crushing them. And like, but you know, I realized there's other things that are more important to me. Like, you know, for me, my family is important, and spending time with them is important. And so having the, you know, success that I've been able to have and allowing me to spend more time with my family, that's worth more to me. And so, you know, whatever is important to you, like not necessarily the money in the bank account, but maybe like it's the freedom to be able to travel or live wherever you want. Or, you know, for somebody like yourself, like it might just be literally not being dead and having a roof over your head. Like, you know, like, so I can't really answer that question, because it's something personal for each individual. Right. And so this is my experience, and everybody's is a little bit different.
Yeah. I agree with that 100%. I always tell people, you know, you have to define yourself for who it is that you want to be. Success is such an intrinsic definition, you know, because
Yeah.
my life probably looks nothing like your life and vice versa. And the way that we navigate the world should be about us choosing how we want to live. And I think that's the biggest thing about growth. That's the biggest thing about success, is like, you figure that out for you and you go towards it as long as it works. And if you wake up one day and you're like, I really don't like this anymore, this is not what I want, like, you can stop. Like, it's okay to quit. And I think, you know, I had this amazing conversation with John Lee Dumas, and he was like, dude, sometimes you just got to quit. Like, you have to give up on shit that doesn't serve you.
Yeah. That's a hard one for stubborn people like me and you.
it was like, I agree with that. I used to think very black and white in that context until I understood something. If I'm putting energy into things that aren't serving me, then I'm taking away energy from things that do.
Yeah.
And when I understood that, man, it was like a baseball bat to the face, because I was like, why am I doing all of these things that don't actually matter?
Yeah.
Collin, my friend, this is an absolutely amazing conversation. Before I ask you my last question, can you tell everybody what you got going on and where they can find you?
Yeah, really simple. Whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on today, you can go search out Sales Transformation. We drop 5 episodes a week. That is the best way to find out what's new, what's exciting, and you know, figure out what's going on in my world.
Brilliant. And my last question for you, my friend, is, what does it mean to you to be unbroken?
You think I would have been prepared for that question, but I wasn't. What does it mean to be unbroken? You know, to not let your past define who you are today.
Simple and concise. I love it, brother.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here, Unbroken Nation. Thank you so much for listening. Please like, subscribe, comment, tell a friend. And until next time, my friends, be unbroken. I'll see ya.